So we're City High, and my name is Romeo, and it's Annalie and Belle, and we're interviewing Vanessa Lay on her novel duology, The Last Bloodcarver and His Mortal Demise. For our first question is, do you have any favorite characters or least favorite characters?
I love all my children equally. But I mean, obviously it's most fun to write, the point of view character, Nika, and Cochin in the second book. So I would say definitely by default, Nika is my favorite character. But of the side cast, I would say Trin is my, golden child. So I think if of all the characters, he might be the only one that I would actually be friends with in real life. The other characters are kind of, varying degrees of morality kind of people. But yeah, I guess I say I like them all, but writing Nika was really fun and really involved. So since I spent so much time in her head, she's my favorite.
And then which character or characters do you connect with most and why?
I guess also Nika. I wrote her from a very personal place. It was a time of my life where I was grappling a lot with identity, who I am and what I wanted to be, going to medical school, becoming a doctor, and then also balancing writing and whatnot. But it was also a time where there was a lot of health issues in my family, and I was really, I guess I was venting a lot of frustrations through her character as she is trying to grapple with losing her identity or her cultural identity, cultural connections, and also trying to, make up for not being able to heal her mother. I was going through my grandmother having dementia, and my grandmother was basically the person who really connected me to my Vietnamese culture. She cooked, she talked the language, so having her go through dementia was kind of like me losing that bit of my culture that I had. So I used her as kind of a mouthpiece for a lot of those frustrations. And so I really, I guess, connected with her. But, I would also say that when we write characters that are really personal to us and then we expect them to be published, sometimes we have to distance ourselves a little from them as well. So in that regard, I try to make her a very polar opposite to my personality. She's like a go-getter, abrasive, doesn't care what people think of her. And I'm kind of the opposite of all those things. I care very much about what people think of me. So being able to both relate a lot to her and distance myself from her is probably, what kept me sane when the book came out.
After publishing your book, is there anything you wish you'd done differently or something you wish you could have changed?
Everything. I think the way publishing works is that when you write a book, it's depending on how lucky you get, especially for a debut, you could spend years trying to get an agent, years trying to get an editor after that. And then when you get an editor, it's still either a year to 2 years to when it gets published. I got a little lucky in that thanks to Twitter back then having a lot of networking for authors, I got my agent and editor pretty quickly. That being said, it was still 2 years from when I wrote it to when it was published. And then at this point, it's been it feels like I wrote this book in a different lifetime. So looking back, which I try not to do, I would change a lot about not writing to a market, I think. And this is kind of meaningless to say because when you work in publishing, you have to write to a market. But I think with debuts in particular, we have to kind of appease a lot of people who want to pigeonhole your book into a certain genre for a certain audience. And I think a lot of that was oh, we want romance. Oh, can we make it like an enemies to lovers romance? And that was not my first inception of the book. That being said, I'm like, I fully trust my editor. Like, she can tell me to do whatever and I will believe her. And I understand that a lot of these things are to appeal to a more general audience and get the book out there, which is at the end of the day what we as authors really try to do. That being said, going forth with, you know, my sophomore duology and hopefully all the books I write in the future, I'm trying to keep push back a little bit more and try to keep my own vision for the book. So I think I will say that I wish I had changed a lot of things, but at the end of the day, if I redid it all over again, I would probably not, because just the way publishing works with your first couple of novels, you are writing a little bit more safely than what you get to do later on.
Do you mind sharing what your kind of original idea was?
Originally coaching in the book, he right now is kind of a mysterious antagonist kind of character, and they do have a very antagonist relationship at first, but it was never the case. I think in the first drafts he actually helped her out a lot, and it was I think enemies to lovers is obviously very popular, and I think that's what they were trying to get me to do. They were like, can we make him more of like an enemies to lover kind of relationship? And I was like, I don't want to mismarket. Can we do like assholes to lover at most? So that's what kind of ended up in the book, is more of an antagonist relationship. I wouldn't particularly characterize it as enemies to lovers. I would think that he doesn't consider her an enemy, but she kind of hates everyone, so that's how it ends up. But I think, you know, romantasy was popular, enemies to lovers is popular, so I squidged a little bit more towards that, and I don't think I, you know, undermined the integrity of my writing by doing that, but if I were to be super true to my original vision, it would be more of like a, I don't know, I think they had a lot more screen time in the original as just more friends and allies than antagonists.
Can I skip ahead to one of the
Yeah.
Okay. One of our later questions that you were just reminding me of was, we were wondering if you think how the blood carving aspect of Nika and Cochin's relationship affects their dynamic, and if without that, like, bond, if they still would have fallen in love, and how it just impacts on the way they view each other.
Yeah, that's a great question. To be honest, I don't think without that bond, I don't think they would have fallen in love. I think at the end of the day, they're two very lonely people who found each other, and I think that's like the crux of their relationship, to be honest. But I think a lot of that was also based off my experience. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, which is a very white city. My high school didn't have a lot of like Asian diaspora. We had a lot of international students that were Asian, but I was one of the few Asian diaspora students, and I didn't really connect with anyone until I went to college. I thought I was like low-key, I thought I was like aromantic, but then I went to college and I met like other Asian kids, and I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I actually do have a type. It's Asian. And I think something so quintessential about their relationship is that they were able to have something shared that put them in adversary with the rest of their city. And sometimes you kind of need that little bit of like, we're on the same team against the whole world, that, you know, really pushes you together. But I don't know if they necessarily would have had anything further to talk about if not for that. I mean, there's a point in the book, I think she would have just killed him if he wasn't. So I think it would have ended there if not for their shared culture.
And then another question about the relationships. How do you think that Nika's relationship is impacted by, like, the start of the relationship with the Kogmi family? Like, them buying Nika from the butcher's row? Like, how does that affect their relationships?
I think one of the big themes that I wanted to get with, really dive into with this story is themes of immigration. So I feel like a lot of the rhetoric around immigrants right now, and especially when my parents came, is either like, we love their culture but we hate them, right? So it's the idea of the Komis buying her. I didn't want to write them as bad people. I wanted to write them as realistic people. So they really regard her as something like less than human at first, but they really need her ability. And in that same vein, a lot of, I think the biggest impact of Asian culture and Asian immigrants on America is that our culture and our food is like everywhere, but like we are not as pervasive as our culture is. So I guess in a way I was writing toward the idea of like appropriation. They like to appropriate her gift and they want to use it in a way that suits them, but at the same time they're like, oh, don't use it in another way, just use it to help us, right? And I think she's so used to it, Nika, that she doesn't really mind it at first. It's kind of like, just another Tuesday for her. But that being said, I think over time when she gets to know more of them and then she meets coaching, she realizes that she wants a relationship that is more, what is the word? Like no strings attached. Like she's always afraid that they only are keeping her around because they want her to heal someone, and as soon as that ends, then they're just gonna pay her and she loses a relationship. Whereas with coaching, she feels like, oh, something deeper connects them, and she doesn't feel like she'll lose them. But I think I didn't intend to make them like villainous characters by any means, but I did want their characters to reflect a lot of the common rhetoric around immigrants.
In what order did you create your characters?
In what order? I think Nika and coaching came first, I believe. This is asking me to think about something from 3 years ago, but I think they came first, and I say that because I think the very last scene of the book is the first thing to come to me, or after the magic system. That was definitely the first. But character-wise, I think the last scene came to me, so I was like, I need this character and I need this character. And then the rest of the supporting cast kind of built around them. I think I have 3 brothers, so every book I write has like a brother-sister relationship, and for some reason it's always older brother, younger sister, even though I only have 1 older brother and 2 younger brothers. But I think the Kongmi siblings came next because I was like, siblings, gotta have them. And then I added Trin because I just wanted to round out that cast in terms of making a family that's like a found family, but at the end of the day, they're their own family, and Nika is always going to be a little bit ostracized from them. So I think I needed the 3, and then the relationship between Andao and Trin actually came way later, when I wanted to parallel her relationship with their established relationship and give her someone to learn from about what love means and what romance looks like. And I was like, I can either have like a minor and an adult, or like the sibling, or like a gay relationship. So it just kind of came naturally as a way to parallel Nika's journey. So I guess all the characters existed first as a plot point, and then just really I grew to like them a lot more.
Are you planning on continuing to write about these characters or this world in the future at all?
Nope, definitely not. I will say in the second book, they asked me to, again, publishing asked you to make things that, are toward marketing and whatnot. They're like, just keep it open, like, just in case. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to. But I think for me, the difference between a good story and a great story is like knowing when to end it. And when I wrote the first book, I had the end of the second book in mind, and I knew that was the entire story that I wanted to write. These characters really only existed for me to convey the message that I wanted to convey throughout both books. This world only existed to that extent, which I'm not saying writers who write like great serials are inferior by any means. I think, to be honest, I wouldn't have the stamina to write longer series or stay in this world for any longer. So yeah, I definitely will end it for many, or keep it there for many reasons. One of which being I don't want to return to this world that I feel like I wrote when I was a different person. But also, I feel like it ended well, and I'm just going to let a good thing be,
Yeah. And then So in his mortal demise, we get like a lot more world building. Did your like process for world building change between the two books?
I will say, I think because I wrote when I think of series and duologies, I kind of conceive it all at once. And like, I know, because I like to foreshadow a lot of the things that happen in the first book, before I like finish copy edits with my editor, I like to have written the second book as well. So I think all the world building did happen at the same time. That being said, when you say world building, I say I kind of plagiarized this from my own life. So it's not super, it wasn't a super creative leap to make the world building in the second book, just because I invented this whole world to kind of convey the metaphors and themes that I wanted to convey, which is one, the American dream. You know, the city, Central Themis, is kind of the metaphor for the American dream. They're like, oh, just come here, work hard and you will succeed. You know, it's a meritocracy. All you need to do is work hard. And I think that's what a lot of immigrants think about, or why they come to America, and certainly why my parents came to America. So it's like the idea of like, oh, we can work hard and we can make it big, and that's all that really matters. And as Nika makes her way through the city, she realizes it's not really that simple. You know, there's a lot of prejudice and racism involved in how far you can get in the society. So the second book came as a extension of that, and it kind of more parallels Cochin's arc. He is mixed race, and so the second book is spent one half in Yarong, the island where his mother comes from, and the other is from Themis, where his father comes from. So it's the idea of him being pulled between two poles, Central Themis and Yarong, and trying to find where he fits in the middle. And I think, I'm not mixed race myself, I'm fully Vietnamese, but I think that's something that mixed race and diasporic Asians share a lot, is that we don't really know where we fit in the spectrum of like American to Vietnamese, Asian. So we're just trying to find our place. And I think the world, for me, only really exists to convey those themes and to supplement the character arcs.
Was there any characters you found difficult writing or had a difficult time writing?
Yeah, okay. The villain, for sure. I think, now that I'm thinking about it, if I had to go back and change something, I would definitely change my villain a little bit. I struggle between making him like a sympathetic villain. You know, everyone loves a sympathetic villain, especially if they're young, male, and hot. But sometimes people are just evil, and I think in that struggle, I ended with something that was like neither here nor there. And I think that's something I would change, and something I struggled with, because while we want to give, I think when we write villains, to make them really compelling, we have to write a little bit of ourselves into them. And that takes a lot of introspection about where our own villainy comes from, our own flaws. So I think when I was writing him, I was like, if I could bring someone back from the dead, I would too. I feel like sometimes we carry a lot of grief, and that goes and manifests in unhealthy ways. But like I said, I think being kind of giving like a half sympathetic, half pure evil gets you somewhere in between, and that kind of waffling doesn't really do the character well. And I think that's something I had a lot of trouble in, because when I first wrote him, I kind of only wrote him as an antagonist to all of Nika's problems. And later on, I was like, okay, but if I make him my own character, or his own character, what does that look like? And I think, the way he ends up now, I'm happy with. I'm very satisfied, but I definitely would want to tweak that a little bit.
How do you blend all of the different genres that are present in your books, such as fantasy, mystery, romance? There's some horror elements at certain points.
Oh, yeah. I guess, I will say I didn't really intend to blend anything. I was just writing from a very specific point of view, and the things that came out were the things that, I was influenced by. It's funny you say horror because back when I did read some reviews, by now I've like blacklisted Goodreads. I'm not on there. But back when I did read reviews, people would be like, "Oh, this is so scary! It's so gory! You need a strong stomach." And I'm like, "Wait a minute!" I didn't really intend that, but it did come across to a lot of readers. I think the reason it feels like a blend, though, is because I was writing really close to my own life, and at that point my life was very much a blend of, I was in medical school, I was learning medicine, everything is very scientific, regimented, but I still had this passion. I feel like I consider myself an artist, even more so sometimes than a scientist. So my own life kind of blends the two, and I was trying to write from my own perspective. And I think what came naturally is, science fantasy rather than sci-fi or fantasy. In terms of the mystery, I love mysteries personally because I have a very short attention span. I feel like mysteries, they're always like keeping you in with a question. So that's like the only thing I write nowadays, is because I need to keep my own self occupied. Like I need like a constant question, fast paced. So I think that's naturally where the mystery comes from, just from my own inattentiveness. But I don't think I ever intended to genre blend, but I'm glad that it's considered a genre blend. I take that as a huge compliment.
Had you always planned to write the second book in dual perspectives?
Did I? Oh yes, I did actually. I did because wait a minute. No, I did. But the thing is, I didn't start out intending to write it in dual timeline. Mm-hmm. I knew it was going to be both Nika and Cochin. So my first draft of the second book, the first block was all Cochin, and then the second block was all Nika. But I was like, there's no mystery there. If you like already know what happens, and then she wakes up, and then everything, it just basically repeats itself, but as exposition to her. I was like, there's no mystery there. There's like nothing keeping me writing. So by chopping it up and dispersing it, I was like having a lot more fun, and I hope readers enjoy that a lot more than what I originally intended. But I did, I think, intend for it to be dual perspective.
What was the thought process while you were coming up with the societal and political cultures in your book? Were they inspired by anything in real life?
Yeah, I guess it was just very much inspired by I wanted to write. Okay, take you on a little bit of my backstory. Is that my parents are immigrants. I was raised in Portland, Oregon, which is very white, as I mentioned. And then the first time I really had any kind of relationship with my own culture beyond the household was college, essentially, where I met the first two Vietnamese people I'd ever seen. That's not my family. So I wanted to write that feeling of finding somebody that is just like you in a city that you feel very alienated from. And when I first started writing again, in COVID. I wanted to write, my culture. I was like, I can't believe I've been writing like European white culture all this time. Like, that's not even my story to write. So I want to write my own story. So I started writing Vietnamese fantasy, but it was very like Vietnamese mainland fantasy. And that wasn't me either. Like, I was raised very American. So I was like, that doesn't feel like me. And every book I wrote thereafter, I was kind of inching more and more toward my own identity, until finally the Last Bloodcarver, I was like, why don't I just write from the perspective of an immigrant's daughter? Like, that's the most accurate to myself as possible. And I didn't intend it to be like a huge social commentary. I was rather just trying to write my own experience. But I guess that's a very political thing nowadays. So I wanted to write the idea of like being alone. I wanted to convey my fears of losing my own culture, and I really wanted to touch on these frustrations of, cultural appropriation. And as it happened, the world building just came around the plot and the character arcs, because when I'm writing about those things, naturally I have to include how Asian Americans are viewed by other Americans, and it just happens naturally because as you're writing your true self, I think you have to include a lot of the struggles that you go through too.
I wanted to ask, you mentioned earlier that you feel like you're a different person now than when you wrote the book. How do you think that you've grown or changed since writing?
Well, I should hope I did. But I think when I was first writing this, I was a lot more, I didn't know what I wanted to write. I wrote YA, and I wrote the kind of book that I had been reading, but I wasn't really sure where I fit into the market and how my writing style matched the age conventions, whether that's YA or that's adult. I had a lot of concepts that are very adult in this book, which were definitely made a lot more PG, like genocide and vivisection. Thank God for a teenage audience. But I think I was kind of neither here nor there between who I wanted to write to and how I wanted to write it. At this stage in my life, I think I'm a lot more, I'm a lot more true to my own vision. As I'm writing my next project with my editor, I have been able to fight back a little bit on edits that I feel stray from my vision. I mean, my editor is amazing. We share a lot of the same vision, but there's some times where I'm like, if this was my first duology, I definitely would have been like, okay, I take your advice, I'll write whatever. But nowadays I'm like, okay, I have a vision, I came in with this vision, and here are the things that I'm willing to compromise on, and here are the things that need to stay in the final draft. And I'm no longer afraid that publishing is going to drop me because of it. At this point, they're stuck with me. But I think gaining confidence as a writer and then finding your own place in the market and seeing that you have an audience is very reassuring, and it's definitely not where I was a couple years ago.
And then, what was your process for building up, all of the relationships in your duology?
All right, let me think. Well, obviously there was the romance, and I think in YA, especially in YA fantasy, a lot of the times it's expected. This was my first time writing a romantic relationship in my books. Normally, I never like to, personally, I never like to write the words "I love you." I feel like when I do write romance, I like it to be perceived off the page rather than explicitly. But I think YA has a couple different conventions, and so their relationship, as I mentioned before, was very different in my head, but really grew both because of what is expected of the genre, but also because of what I was willing to compromise on. That being said, I think their relationship, it's not quite based on my relationship with my current boyfriend, who's Vietnamese, but it was definitely inspired by that feeling of finding someone who shares your culture. You go out to eat with them, you don't have to explain what a dish is, or those kind of things that I never really thought of when before college, but now I appreciate so much in my current relationship. So that's how their relationship came about. In terms of the other romantic relationship, as I mentioned, I wanted it to serve as a parallel with her relationship. It's where she realizes what a relationship means. It's she's like, oh, I've never seen a functional, loving relationship survive this long. I guess relationships mean protecting someone or giving your life for someone, things like that. And then, of course, the sibling relationship I mentioned was because I love my brothers and I always like to represent them in the things I write. But to save the best for last, my favorite relationship is actually between Nika and Trin. That kind of honestly, they are more the enemies to lovers relationship, not romantically, but platonic lovers, because they really come to, he's her biggest op in the beginning, but becomes a big brother figure to her. And I think that was the most fun to write just because they evolve so much, and I really wanted him to act as this like guiding force for her, but at the end of the day can never really understand where she's coming from because he's just so different, to kind of contrast Cochin, who is able to understand where she's coming from and share every aspect of his life with her.
Curious to know what like your writing process is like, and just like a little bit of like, when did you start writing? What is that? Yeah.
Yes.
What does that look like for you?
For sure. I started writing when I was very young, very, very young. When I first gained consciousness, I loved the Warriors Cat series a lot. And so my first things that I ever wrote were like basically plagiarisms off the Warriors Cats. I was like, oh, these are cats, but they're also assassins. But obviously, that did not get published. Thank the Lord. But I stopped writing basically. I wrote pretty avidly in high school. I stopped writing in college because I was like, time to get serious with my life, time to study medicine. But I did not enjoy those periods where I stopped writing. I just ran out of time and something was always missing. But then during COVID, I started writing again. I was like, you know what, this feels right. Like, I'm writing, I'm being creative again. I have time now since everyone is home and classes don't really matter. So I wrote 3 books in the period between, I guess I was making up for last time because I think I wrote 3 books in a year, and this was one of them where I was trying to find my voice again, or like find my footing on, the last YA book I read had been like Throne of Glass, so that was like way long ago. So just trying to find where, what kind of books I like to read, what kind of books I like to write. So yeah, I started writing again in COVID, and the rest is history, I guess. But to start writing a book, I always go by vibes. Vibes are the best. You have to start with vibes. For me, I think it comes to me in a dream. I get like a scene that I really like the idea of, and I was like, okay, can I build an entire story about this? And I will go on Pinterest, and I will look through Pinterest, and I was like, what tropes and aesthetics do I like? Because as much as people say, don't write tropes, I think tropes are a great place to start. Like, obviously, don't make tropes your entire book, but being able to know, like, oh, what do you really like? What's your guilty pleasure? And adding that is, I think, one of the most important things to do as a writer, because you have to enjoy what you write. Otherwise, you're going to hate it. But yeah, I go by vibes, and then I am a very strict plotter. I cannot make up anything with a blank page. I have to outline everything. So I will, I'll go like just write everything step by step, chapter by chapter, outline it all. My outlines are like half the size of the actual book, and then I'll just write and go into a trance, drink a lot of Coke. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend my writing style to anyone, really, but I think it's very effective for me as someone who doesn't really have a lot of time to write, to be able to do a lot of foreplanning, and then the writing part itself is just like, very quick and deliberate and good for deadlines for sure. But that being said, first drafts, everyone says, are always terrible, and I'm no exception. First drafts are always just to even just get the plot down and the characters, to have them exist. But after I write the first draft, I always encounter something in my life that I get really frustrated by, or that I want to tell through a story, and then I'm like, oh, this would be a great thing to integrate into these character arcs. Like, I just need to tweak a little bit, and then I can vocalize this like issue that I have with the world or with something. And I think that's how you layer on these themes that I hope I layered on, and make a book that's like more than just an adventure, which is not to say that I don't love my, I brain candy books, but I really like to be able to write something very personal to myself. So I think that's a big part of my process.
Sorry. 。
Mm-hmm. 。
Oh,
嗯。
sorry. 。
Mm-hmm. 。
Um, Sorry, we did it out of order, so I'm sorry.
Oh, good.
We've covered like pretty much everything.
Yeah, I think most of it was covered.
You guys have other just questions, or like, there's also, we have some on the back too. If there's anything in there. I'm curious about, the like being in med school and writing, and like, where are you with that journey too? Of like, yeah.
So, the way it worked out, actually, somehow, the publishing gods are looking on me very favorably because the way my timelines have added up for both this duology and my soon-to-come duology, for which I can't really say anything about right now, it's kind of very favorable to med school as much as it can be. I will say I wrote this book before I started medical school. By the time I was in medical school, I was just like copy edits, like saying yes on things, saying no on things, those kind of things. So it was very easy for this book to come out my first year of medical school because at that point I was done. But at that time I was writing my second book. So I guess I've always been working on a project throughout medical school, but one thing, I guess most people don't know this about medical school, but nowadays, the first 2 years of medical school are mostly didactic, like book learning. Second year is when it gets really hard, when you're like in the hospital on rotations. That's when most medical students that you talk to kind of don't want to exist anymore. But the first 2 years are, for the most part, pass-fail. And in my opinion, there's no difference between, like killing yourself for the 100 versus like being okay with, something less. Okay, I don't need 100, I'll just get 90 and write my book, So obviously that's gonna have to change as I'm second year, as I enter my third year. But one of my saving graces is my publishing team. Like, they communicate with me so well. They are very accommodating. I just got out of an exam on Friday yesterday, and I was like, I cannot make a flight. Like, I can't make the flight here to give these talks until like 4:00. Can you find me a flight? And also, I want it from my close airport. And then she was like, say no more, I'll figure it out. And I was like, oh, by the way, I have to be back for an exam on Monday. And she's like, say no more, we'll put all your events on Saturday and you can fly out Sunday. So they're just very accommodating and very communicative with me. And then I was like straight up, for the next year, from this May to next May 2026, you won't hear from me anymore. And they're like, okay, we won't hear from you anymore. Like, we won't expect you to go to these events. I was like, great. So I think a lot of support is necessary, and just having a really nice team.
Going back to your writing process, I was curious, how much do you, how detailed is your plan, and how do you come up with a complete story from start to finish?
That's a very long question. I gave a whole talk at one point on how to plot. As a general rule, for me, I don't really obey story structure for better or for worse, but I obey a few big rules. One is to always keep your writer reading for something, whether it's a question they have unanswered or a reveal, but don't have them waiting on that question for more than half the book. So for me, whenever I write something, I like to think of it as rising and falling, but every time you rise and fall, it gets a little higher and higher, and then until you reach your climax. And I think that's a pretty general rule with story structures as well. So I don't really use a 3-act or a 4-act or a 2-act. I'm more thinking how many big, huge, dramatic plot points came to me in my dreams, and where do I space them out, and how can I build up to them and fall back from them, and build up to them and fall back from them. And I think whether that is 3 big scenes that I want, and that's then becomes a 3-act structure, or if it's only 2, in which case it's first half, second half kind of book. I think that all depends on the story that you're trying to write, and it's very flexible. That being said, whenever anyone asks me how to plot, I say my most important rule is, when you first think of your idea, maybe this will give away the story structure of every book that I write hereafter. When you first think of your idea and the question that you pose at the beginning of the book, whether it be like, who's the murderer, or, you know, what's going to happen to this character, most people, I think, are told to put that at the end when everything is revealed. But I would argue, put that in the midpoint, and then spend the rest of the book thereafter dealing with the consequences of that reveal. And in that way, I feel like my attention is kept a lot better. As I said, I have a very short attention span, and I can only read like 50K book words before I'm like, okay, I need some big reveal. I need like a big turning point. And I think a lot of books do this really well. Like The Hunger Games, The Hunger Games doesn't start at the beginning, doesn't start at the end. It's like right smack dab in the middle, and it like shifts the entire tone of the book. So I guess that's just very one part of my planning, but that's something that I really try to abide by. And then everything is very flexible around it and needs to kind of work toward the story that you're writing. For mysteries, obviously, I really like to do the kind of like, reveal an answer by asking another question. I think that's how a lot of mysteries kind of keep pace. But in terms of how detailed my outlines are, I think they're as detailed as they need to be for me to never feel like I'm floundering. If I'm confronted with a blank page, then my brain shuts off. I need to have something to work off of. So unfortunately, I have to make them quite detailed, or else I lose interest.
Might be everything.
What's it like to push back against an editor to protect your work? Do they listen to you, or are they like, you're a fool?
I will say, my editor, I don't mean to fault her at all. I was a pushover. She would be like, oh, you want to try this? And I'd be like, yep, okay, let's try that. Like, you're right. Your word is God. And I think nowadays, I see her edits for what they are. They're like suggestions that she's trying to help me make it better. But sometimes, like with the vision I have in mind, like she doesn't quite know where I want to go with the sequel either. So when she suggests something that might be in contrast to what I'm planning later on, there are some things that I found that are non-negotiables, even in my second work. Romance being one of them. I think with the imprint that I'm with and the team that I'm with, I think because they want to market that way, they have their higher-ups are asking them to tell me, basically, that they need a certain thing out of the romance to be able to market it. But even if I don't want... I feel like I've never felt like I've written something that goes against my, writer's integrity. Everything that she suggests, if it's non-negotiable, then it's like my way of doing it. So I guess to push back against the editor, you have to know what you're willing to compromise on and what you're willing to put your foot down. Romance is something I'm willing to compromise on, but I think the core of the books and the characters' journeys reflecting my personal journey, those are the things I want to put my foot down. And when my editor acquired my next book, she was like, where do you what's non-negotiable for you? What cannot be changed? And I was upfront. I was like, I want the relationship between these characters to not be changed. I want it to still be about this. And I was like, but everything else is pretty flexible. And I think they go in knowing that, so they kind of know what they're allowed to ask me to change, and what I would push back on.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate all your questions. They were
amazing.
Very
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was really nice to meet you.
Appreciate it.